Okay, so my baby is down and she's been down for a while, so hopefully I don't wake her. But we're going on to Dean Corrll, and I think Dean Corrll is pretty interesting, so I hope y'all find Dean Corrll interesting as well. So, on August 8th of 1973, the police got a call from a young man who requested they come to a house in Pasadena, which was a suburb of Houston, Texas, not Houston. So it was a young voice and it was slurred. And this is what he said: "Listen, you better come over. I'll kill the guy here." So ya was Y-A-H and was A-H. So he identified himself as Wayne Henley and said the address was 2020 Lamar Drive. Okay, 2020 was a bad year. So it's obviously a bad house number. Okay, we should have taken this as a clue as to what would come in 2020. Anyway, a patrol car responded, and outside of the ordinary-looking white ranch-style house, they found two teenage boys and one teenage girl who were obviously high on drugs. I don't know how they knew. Maybe their eyes were bloodshot. I don't know. But they were obviously high on drugs. So Henley identified himself. He said, "I'm the one who called," and he let them inside. Now, the few rooms that were inside were not furnished very much. There was very little furniture. And they had a heavy, sickening smell. There we go. So the cops found the corpse of a tall, pudgy man with sideburns that Henley said was Dean Corrll. So at this time, the murderer has been murdered. It's kind of like Dexter, you know? So Henley said that he had shot him in self-defense because he feared for his life and the life of his friends. Okay, he shot Dean Corrll 6 times. That's not just self-defense, that's kind of overkill. Anyway, Henley laid out the whole story for the cops. So Henley had met Corrll 2 years earlier, or approximately 2 years earlier, and Corrll had given him money, food, and a place to stay, plus marijuana and other drugs. Plenty of other drugs, according to the book. So all Henley had to do for all of this was to patrol the streets and find boys and bring them back to Corrll. So Corrll would rape them, and then Henley found out that sometimes he would not just rape them, he would torture and kill them too. Okay. So Henley then explained exactly how he usually found the victims and exactly what Corrll did to them. So not only did he tell them how he met Corrll, he actually laid out all of the details. So Henley and another boy named David Owen Brooks would cruise the streets. And when they found a likely candidate for partying, they would invite him to get in the car. So they never forced him. They would just be like, "Hey, you want to go to a party?" and invite him into the car. They would proceed to go to Corrll's house, introduce the boy to Dean Corrll, and then start to party. So the boy that they picked up would be encouraged to drink, smoke marijuana, and sniff acrylic paint that Corrll stole from his job. He was a relay tester at Houston Lighting and Power Company. So after, drinking and smoking and sniffing paint, he'd pass out. And more than occasionally, when he woke up, he would be spread eagle and pinned to a sheet of plywood. So either he'd be restrained by nylon cord or handcuffs, but he would be stuck to this plywood. So, he's in like a starfish position almost, and he's stuck to a piece of plywood. That would terrify me if I woke up like that. So, in preparation for what was about to happen to the boy, Corrll would place a sheet of plastic under the plywood because that would catch any excreta, blood, or vomit, or any DNA really that this boy lost. It said that would invariably discharge from the victim. So blood, because he's raping them. Vomit. I don't know why vomit. I can understand excreta. If he kills them, there's going to be excretions. Okay. Corrll would use knives and other implements to work his victims over. That just sounds terrible. And he would sometimes castrate them. So castrating them might have added to his fantasy. Maybe he wasn't physically attracted to females, but he wanted to feel like a man in the situation, so he would castrate the boys to make him feel more masculine. It could have also been a trophy. Yeah. Then he would crank the radio up to full volume because that way the boy can scream and cry and plead all he wants and nobody would hear him. So anything that followed would last anywhere from 10 minutes to half a day, depending on his mood and his spare time. He usually shot or strangled the boy. And sometimes he would use the help of his young assistants, the ones who picked up the boy in the beginning. Now, this was the same fate that Henley thought he was about to endure when he shot Corrll. Now, when he lived off Corrll, Henley had a whole other life. He had a 15-year-old girlfriend, and he lived at home. So he was a young teenager at the time. His family thought he was a normal, wild kid, his only vice being the propensity to drink too much beer. Okay? Now, this is 1973, remember. In the early mornings of August 8th, Henley, his girlfriend Williams, and a male friend named Curley, I love that, but it's Kerley, not Curly. Yeah, okay. But they showed up at Corrll's house, and this precipitated real problems for Corrll. He was enraged at Henley for bringing a girl into his male den. But after a while, he relaxed, and they all started to drink, smoke, and sniff acrylic paint. That was our bedroom door Sadie's trying to get out. Eventually, everybody seemed to pass out. So Curly, Williams, Henley, and Corrll, they're all passed out. But Henley gained consciousness, and he gained consciousness technically second. And when Henley started to regain consciousness, adrenaline kicked in, and he was instantly fully awake. Dean Corrll was just finishing handcuffing Henley to the plywood sheet. The other two people had already been immobilized. They apparently slept through it. And Corrll was muttering angrily that he was going to kill all of them. So something happened that made Corrll angry, and he was going to kill them all. So Henley spoke rapidly, and he spoke for his life. He said not to do it, and if he would let him go, he would kill Williams and Curly, and this appealed to Corrll. I don't know why he wants Henley to kill both of them, but he said he would. And so Corrll said, okay, I'll take the guy, you take the chick. So Corrll doesn't want Henley to kill them both. He's like, okay, you can kill the girl. I'll kill the boy, but you can kill the girl. Corrll released Henley, who immediately grabbed Corrll's .22 pistol and shot him 6 times, then called the police. So he's still high and hungover, or high and drunk. He's not totally, he hasn't slept it off. He's still high from doing drugs, from smoking marijuana, sniffing paint, and drinking. So he's just, there are so many things going wrong. But he called the police. And then when the police asked Henley how many people Corrll had killed, they were absolutely stunned. Like their mouths hit the floor. He said 30, I think. So the police asked Henley whether or not he knew where the bodies were, and he said he thought they were under the floor of a rented boat shack at Southeast Boat Storage, which was about 10 miles south of the city proper near the power company. Now, Corrll worked at the power company, remember. So Henley led the detectives and 4 convicts who were to do the digging. They had convicts do the digging, but they had convicts do the gardening at the community college here in town, so, you know. Anyway, he led them to the shack, one of a number of metal storage units about 30 feet long and deep enough to handle large boats. Okay. The floor was earthen, and Henley said that after Corrll buried the bodies there, he poured crushed limestone over them to destroy them. Lime destroys bodies. So, The trek to the boat shack attracted the media, and they arrived in force. There were newspaper reporters, magazine writers, and television reporters, complete with all of their equipment. So it was a circus, okay? The digging began, and it wasn't long before things started to show up. A random sneaker, a watch, some money. I don't know why he didn't rob them. If I were to kill somebody, I would take all their money, but whatever. Then, finally, the first body was unearthed. It was the decayed remains of a young man in a plastic bag, accompanied by, I love this, stomach-wrenching odor. I love that. I just think that is a great description. Then another body was unearthed, and then another, and the convicts kept digging, sweat pouring down them, because this is Texas, so it's not only hot, but it's hot and it's humid, and let me tell you, I prefer Arizona in the dry heat any day. Another body, each was a young man in the plastic bag, but the lime had also done its work, okay? Lime destroys bodies. The diggers started to come across body parts, feet, hands, legs, just bones. Human remains in just a mess. Okay? The smell was atrocious, and so was the horror of what these convicts were uncovering. Okay? Body after body after body, just one on top of the other. One convict could not go on. His psychological defenses broke down, and he just started sobbing. And once he got control of himself sobbing, he just started throwing up. He couldn't stop throwing up. So it was just too much for him, and he had to stop. In the end, two of them had to stop, because one was sobbing and then throwing up, and then another one started throwing up, and they just couldn't stop, so they had to stop. So around 10 or 11 in the evening, they went out in the morning or early afternoon. This is 10 or 11 in the evening, so it's probably been about 8 or 9 hours, if not more at this time. So some burly detectives took over because the convicts couldn't go on, and they had these high wattage lights secured to fire trucks. They have those high wattage lights on our baseball and soccer fields here in town, so I know exactly what they look like, but they had them secured to fire trucks. Okay? So the fire trucks parked at the scene, and they attached these high wattage lights to them. And then more bodies were found, and more bodies after that. And one detective could say sums it up perfectly, and he said 3 words. And this is what he said. He said, Christ. Jesus Christ. That's all he said. And that kind of sums it up perfectly. Like, you don't know. You need Jesus Christ if you're uncovering this, okay? If you are uncovering body after body after body, one on top of the other, and then more bodies, and people are throwing up, you need Jesus Christ, okay? So there was one horror in particular that really stuck with one of the detectives. He had a nephew who'd been missing, this detective. His nephew was missing. And his nephew's body was the 10th body to be unearthed. This detective was at the scene. He saw his nephew's body become unearthed. How terrible is that? Okay, you now have to go to your brother and sister-in-law, I don't know which one it was, and tell them, oh, I found your son. Like, that's terrible. Okay? So after a while, close to vomiting themselves, the detectives wore gas masks. And after a while, they stopped. They were exhausted, they were disgusted, they were traumatized, and they couldn't go on. So one said, it's worse. A lot worse than a plane crash. Okay, that's terrible. Plane crashes have like 60 to 90 victims. They didn't even get all the way through 30. They didn't even unearth all 30 of them, and it's worse than a plane crash. That's how bad Corrll did this, okay? When they were formally finished, they had not uncovered the 30 bodies Henley spoke about. They had only uncovered 27. Okay? So when they formally finished, only 27 bodies were found. They just couldn't go on. There might have been 3 more there that weren't found. But they found the 27 of them. So, originally, Corrll had lived in the Heights neighborhood of Houston, which was a poor area of Houston. that was riddled with worn-out houses, junkyards, empty lots. It was kind of a perfect example of urban blight at the time, okay? And this is where he met Henley, because Henley and his whole family lived in that neighborhood. And it's where Henley and this other boy would cruise for potential victims. So all of it goes back to this Heights neighborhood of Houston, okay? Now, Henley was not at all subtle about picking up boys. When families started to complain about missing sons, it should not have been that difficult to make a connection between the missing boys and Henley, because, he wasn't subtle. Now, at the time, the Houston police was terribly, terribly understaffed. So there were only 2,200 cops to handle a population of 2 million people, but they also think that the staff was poorly trained, way undermotivated, underpaid, and they had misguided efforts. They never made the connections, and the connection, and the abductions and killings continued, unabated. So they think Corrll first killed in 1970. That's a year before he met Henley. So people that knew him said that his personality underwent a change around that time, because before 1970, he was described as hardworking. He worked at the power company and a candy company, and he had very little outward expression of emotion, but the candy company was owned by him and his mother. So obviously he's hardworking, because not only is he running a store with his mother, but he's also working another job. But something changed in 1970. He became quick to get angry, was ultra sensitive to things, and he loathed the idea of getting old. His age he hated the idea of getting old. He started to drink, and in conversations with his mother, he seemed very depressed, and his mother said even on the verge of suicide. Now, his background was kind of chaotic. He was born in Waynesdale, Indiana on Christmas Eve in 1939. Now, at the time, his parents, Mary and Arnold Corrll, were 24 years old. Now, his mother became Mary West. She got married again. Arnold worked in a factory, and Mary stayed home to take care of the kids. So, obviously, at this time, Dean Corrll is not the only child. Okay, now, there was trouble in the marriage almost from the start. One of the problems, as Mother Mary West said, was that Arnold didn't like or appreciate kids. So she has at least 2, and he doesn't want them. He doesn't like them. He was distant from Dean and his younger brother, Stanley. Okay, so when his parents gave birth to him, they were 24, but he had a younger brother, Stanley. It doesn't tell us how much younger, just younger. So shortly afterward, Mary and Arnold got divorced. And Mary found herself on her own with 2 young kids, though Arnold did make child support payments every month. So Mary Corrll had to go work because she's alone with 2 kids. She has no house. All she has is the money that her husband sends, or her ex-husband sends. And so a variety of people took care of Dean and his brother, and sometimes they had to take care of themselves. Now, when a child's left alone for long periods of time, it can be frightening and cause anger, and the child will try to scurry for safety in a way. Psychotic people, however, will build worlds that look safe and habitable and try to live in them. So, to do this, they might adopt new identities, and that will help them cope with the stress. It's a psychotic thing. And sometimes, safety can mean assuming an identity of the parent perceived as having the strongest persona. So in this case, it would probably be Arnold. The child may not like the new identity that he or she takes on, especially if it's an identity with a different gender. So if you're a man taking on the identity of a woman, or a woman taking on the identity of a man. So Dean adopted the identity of his mother. So I think Arnold was the stronger parent in the marriage, but when the marriage collapsed and Mary had to go work to support her children, he took on the identity of her. So, unconsciously, the child may loathe the identity that they have. And the reason Dean took on the identity of his mother is because this is the real parent they know. He has to take care of Stanley. He needs to be that figure for him. Their father's not around. The mother's all they have. So they think that the identity of his mother frightened and diminished him. And the way to handle that in the psychotic mind is to kill it. So in Dean's mind, he had to kill his mother. He had to kill that persona of his mother. And he did. At least 27 times he killed it. Because every time he killed a person, he killed that persona. At least 27 times. Now, Elmer Wayne Henley was tried for his murderous participation in the Houston killings and was found guilty. Okay. Elmer is his first name. Okay. Elmer was my parents' cow, so that just drives me crazy. But yes, he was obviously by Wayne, which is cooler. But yes, he was tried because he picked up boys for Dean Corrll. He was found guilty. He was sentenced to 594 years. Okay, 594. Okay, if it is above a human lifespan, it's just like, what are you gonna do it? 594 years in one day. He's dead. What are you gonna do? Then, on December 21st, 1973, the verdict was reversed on appeal, with the appeals court declaring that Henley's defense attorney did not get enough consideration on a change of venue. And a short while later, Henley was retried, found guilty again. He's still in jail. Dean Corrll is dead. Wayne Henley was tried for murdering Dean Corrll and for participating in the murders of Dean Corrll. The murders Dean Corrll committed. So, this one was a little shorter. I thought it would be a lot shorter than it was, but don't worry. There are some really short ones that are like a page and a half, and we'll get through that like that. But yeah, thank you for watching.